I want to bring in my guests. I want to bring in my guests early. We have a full 7 o'clock hour. Jeff is in Australia, and so he is in a aggressive time zone at 9 p.m. there. How you doing, Jeff? You doing okay?
I'm really good. I'm really good.
Um,
We've been
you said
sent to some interesting news today.
yes, yes. So you sent me an email first, just for the audience to know. Jeff Rich is an author, historian, podcaster who worked for 35 years in government. He's now retired. He currently lives in Melbourne, Australia. I can never get that out correct. Jeff has spent a lifetime studying history and how the knowledge of historical currents can give context to a changing world. And you can find Jeff on YouTube at The Burning Archive. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. You have a damn good show, Jeff. The Burning Archive is fantastic. I saw
Thanks,
your
Jamal.
interview with the most recent gentleman on whether Australia will go to war.
Hmm.
That is a terrifying interview. It's
Mm.
terrifying because his answer comes to somewhat of a similar assessment that we had of we don't know. That is not an assuring answer. Like if somebody's saying, hey, is your country going to get fed to the Chinese? And the guy says, I'm not sure.
Yep.
That is not a
Yep.
reassuring answer. Give me your take
Yeah.
on that interview. Like, what did you come away with thinking after that interview and that conversation? It was a good interview, by the way.
It
It was
was
very knowledgeable.
a great interview. It was with Warwick Powell, who people may know. He does, quite a few shows on different channels. He's a historian, but he really understands finance and economics and all that sort of stuff. And I think he's an adjunct professor at QUT. And I sort of asked him the same question you asked me on the show. I think last week, maybe Jamal, which was, do you think yes or no? Do you think Australia, if the US asked us to, would go to war with China over Taiwan? And Warwick said, I don't know. And that really is terrifying. And I guess the issue is our track record, I guess, is not great in terms of doing what our allies said. The news has just come through today that Australia has signed up to some 50-year defence agreement with Britain related to the submarines, which will probably get them all in 50 years' time. So
This
it's
is
pretty,
AUKUS, correct? Or
yeah,
is it
AUKUS, yeah, AUKUS, yeah. I call it myself the dud subs deal. So, just it's a little bit easier to remember. And so, yeah, we don't have a great track record on that, but it also depends a lot upon, I guess where America's at. And within Australia, people are adopting a range of positions. There's a lot of pushback to it, but then there are also a lot of the sort of pro-American defence sort of lobby people who are kind of saying, well, what are you talking about? Of course, we're already committed, if you like. We have to fight communism or whatever. The reality is there's the Pine Gap, which is a big surveillance facility in the centre of Australia. There's troop commitments. There's the nuclear submarines. A former head of the Prime Minister's Department in Australia has called has said Northern Australia is de facto an American military colony at the moment. So there's already, if you like, compromised sovereignty, which is a real worry. But there are also some calm heads, I guess you could say, like people like Hugh White, who's a very distinguished defence commentator in Australia, who's very against AUKUS and against an undying commitment to America, who are saying that in the end, his assessment is America is sort of pulling out already and has already recognised that it actually can't win a war against China, for the West Pacific, so that his assessment is, when push comes to shove, reality will take over and there won't actually be a war, however high the rhetoric is. But you don't really want to be in this situation
From his mouth to
So
God's ears. That's terrifying, right? Like, because the reality is not, like, for example, the Ukraine conflict. Like, you could
yeah,
say, hey, I know you guys are saying this stuff about Russia, but is it true? Like,
yeah,
meaning they're going into this conflict thinking, okay, we're going to knock over the Russian government and we're going to be drinking coffee in the Kremlin or drinking vodka in the Kremlin. And this is
yeah,
going to be fantastic.
yeah,
Not so much. I can show you John Kiriakou when he was on the show. He pointed
mm,
out how in a meeting before Iraq, they were talking about going into Iran within like a few months. Like,
mm,
yeah, we're going to knock over Iraq. They're going to see us as liberators, and then we're going to go rolling into Tehran. It's
mm.
like none of that happened. None of that happened.
Yeah.
Israel, another
But you see,
situation, right?
the
I guess
one
my
thing
point is,
that, yeah,
no,
yeah. But the one thing that does give me some reassurance, perhaps, is, I mean, no one is as nuts here in Australia about China as America has been about Russia over the last, I don't know, 10 years. Although, there's been some of the similar kind of stuff about them interfering and all this sort of stuff. But, there's a very large proportion of the Australian population, I don't know, it's maybe 5% who are direct migrants from China, and a significantly larger number who are, children of migrants from China kind of thing.
yeah,
So it's a very significant part of the community. And when I talk about with, people I know, the whole idea of conflict with China is just kind of terrifying to people. I think Jamal's just dropped out there, so I might just keep talking while Jamal comes back. So it's sort of, it feels unlikely that Australia will actually do this, but it is possible. And I guess the other thing that Warwick talked about in the interview with me was about just the economic relationship between Australia and China, which is very, very deep. And there does seem to be evidence of an improving sort of diplomatic relationship as well. So I really do hope Jamal comes back soon. I'm not quite sure what's going on here. Uh, um, so, Jamal, I'm just going to keep talking in the hope that you do come back any second now. And it's just an internet dropout. And I'll just move over here so it looks a little less weird in the screen. So if you're listening to the show still despite Jamal dropping out, do sort of do check out the interview with Warwick Powell, which I did as a live show, and also I've released little clips focused on the American side of things, but also on the military diplomatic side of things, but also on the economic side of things with Warwick Powell. And look, the other thing I was going to talk with Jamal about was just about the whole Ukraine situation, which is also a little bit fascinating at the moment in terms of the protests that have been going on in Ukraine. Let me just check the email to see if Jamal sent anything about what's going on. Nope. So I guess there's been this discussion about whether or not the protests in Ukraine are set up, whether they're astroturfed, or whether they're genuine, spontaneous things, whether they'll lead to an overthrow of the government, a second Maidan, all that sort of thing. And I was sort of saying to Jamal earlier today that, or overnight, that my sense of things is that these protests are not astroturfed.
Okay, Jeff, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Jamal.
Thank you. The power in the entire block has gone down.
Oh, no.
My neighbor just came out of his place and says, hey, is your power down? Both of us are looking at each other. He's like, he dropped the F-bomb and walked back into his room. He says, 5 o'clock on a Friday, F it. This happened
I
to me
was
when I was
just
in
filling
Albania.
the air, but I'm not
Thank you
as
for that.
experienced a
Thank you for
radio
that.
host as you.
You and KJ did the same thing, right? When we went down and KJ just kept going. Thank you for that. This time around, I was like, I will not succumb to this. I have a major battery pack that I use for computer cell phone. My cell phone is built to have internet coverage across the world.
Yep.
So we are going to run this show, even if they don't have power in this apartment complex. Damn it, we're going to run it. Please continue with what you were saying. Thank you for
Yeah.
this. I'm sorry.
Just to pick up from where you were left off, I mean, the one thing that gives me some assurance is just the level of cultural and business and education and people-to-people contacts in China.
Yeah.
And like in Australia, I mean, Australia is all in the fight with Ukraine and all that sort of thing, even though I'm one of the few dissident voices in Australia about it. So, and no one in Australia feels the way about China that they do at the moment about, Russia kind of thing. People will voice all sorts of, opinions about Putin and all that sort of stuff. But there's not really the same kind of community sentiment about China. There's always a little bit of the, sort of race element, but it's a pretty small proportion of the population in Australia these days that are like that. But yeah, that's the thing that gives me some comfort. But I just don't think it's really ultimately a decision that's driven by the public. It's a decision that's driven by the elites.
One of the things that your guest pointed out was that Australia effectively reshifted itself after Britain collapsed as an empire.
Yep.
And that America being on the decline as an empire, that
Yep.
a new adjustment is going to have to be made. I'm going to have to move that. That's very loud. That a new adjustment is going to have to be made. And that there's this kind of hope that daddy stops drinking. Like that basically that America reforms itself into something else that's not whatever the hell it is now. There's this comic book Injustice where Superman goes rogue and tries to effectively take over the world by force. And it's kind of like that, where even whether intentional or otherwise, the comic book makers who associate Superman with the US, freedom, justice, the American way, etc., realize something is going wrong. Superman there's something wrong. He's gone rogue. Do you see it that way too, where in their minds, we want a world leader, we want America to be a world leader. We believe that America, we lumped in with this, let's say, this empire, and we want this empire to be able to maintain itself because we're not going to be these kind of world leaders without it. And so we're hoping that America becomes something else and maintain its imperial position, but acts differently.
Yep, absolutely. Like, some very senior people like former heads of foreign affairs, former foreign ministers, basically state explicitly the view that American primacy has been good for Australia and, so we want that to continue, but we just want it to return to the kind of good old sane American primacy that we remember from, the heyday of the Clintons and Obama and that sort of era. That that's the sort of in these people's minds that's the glory days of America. They've sort of forgotten about the Bushes and all that sort of stuff, and just reset American foreign policy in the rose-tinted glasses about what Barack Obama was about. And
really? They think Obama is
absolutely.
That's amazing.
It's explicitly like that. So there is, I think, to some degree, a bit of a response in Australia of kind of waiting Trump out and assuming that America is going to revert to normal. And that's encouraged by the fact that there's an awful lot of overlapping sort of elites and overlapping sort of interests. There's a very prominent commentator, Bruce Wolpe, in Australia on American affairs, who sort of, bemoans the fact about Trump's America. They all talk about Trump's America and, just assume that once he's gone, it will return to the good America. But Bruce Wolpe's like, old Democratic Party operative from the Clinton era,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of these sort of personal and other kind of connections that sort of bind people together. And so Warwick was talking partly about something that I talked about in a piece I've written, and that's coming out in a YouTube video on the weekend too, which is the famous switch in Australian foreign policy was in sort of 1941, 1942, when the British Empire's on its knees, Singapore falls, and the then Prime Minister John Curtin turns to America. He explicitly says, "We look to America free of the pangs of tradition." And this is seen as the founding moment when the American alliance was formed. And the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has just given, or in the last couple of weeks, given a speech where he sort of uses the phrase progressive patriotism, which I think is a phrase from the sort of American Democratic Party lexicon as well. Yeah, and it's sort of been recycled and said, look, hey, no one knows we bought that from America, do they? We'll just put a new colour of paint on it and, say we're being patriotic.
Yeah. Man,
he hasn't fooled you, clearly, Jamal.
I don't think you guys realize, and I'm not talking about you, but I don't think they realize how far this country has fallen. Like if you're talking about let's say 60s, and let's put aside for the racist apartheid state for the moment. You had kind of an FDR legacy where you had a growing middle class, growing prosperity. And even though you kind of had this capitalism that was there, you also had, even at the very least, ideas of a great society that they were talking about implementing. That's not the America we have today. That's not the way it works. I mean, the healthcare thing by itself is a really good example. Donald Trump's bill is cutting out $1 trillion, nearly $1 trillion in healthcare in a country that dies 5 times earlier or 5 years earlier than Europe. That's astonishing. They don't care. Like, they've gotten to this level where they felt like the Soviet Union has collapsed. We're all Fukuyamas. This is the end of history. Any, let's say, bones we had to throw to the public in order to push down arguments for the Soviet Union, that is over with. We can now just take it all. And that's the way they function. But that stuff is not conducive to society. I think even you and I talked about that. These things aren't conducive to maintaining a society. You're spending $1 trillion on the military. That's astonishing by itself, right? I guess my point is, I get Australia's point of, we want daddy to put down the bottle. But daddy's not putting down the bottle. He's guzzling even more so.
No, that's right. And, it's the other aspect of the historical comparison is the truth about what John Curtin was doing is, after the initial shock of basically the British Empire being on the verge of complete collapse in, 41, 42, ultimately what he really does is he's not all that pleased with the Americans because, like General MacArthur is actually, effectively the military consul of Australia and is, telling the government what the hell they should do with all his, charm. That pretty strained relationship. And John Curtin, the Australian Prime Minister, really has this plan for creating what he calls a fourth British Empire, explicitly a fourth British Empire, to sort of rebuild the British Empire, but with the dominions like Australia, the white dominions like Australia. At the same time, India is in revolt, and the British Empire is placing Gandhi and Nehru, etc., in jail. But Australia wanted the sort of white dominions to have a sort of, to have a bigger say in the British Empire, and the sort of ideology of the time was they were the better Britons. They were sort of like the new and improved version of Britain in Australia and New Zealand and Canada and white South Africa. And in a way, I think a lot of the Australian elites are sort of thinking of themselves in a similar sort of way, that they're sort of reviving the American empire and giving it new zest. There are defence strategists in Australia who claim credit for the American Indo-Pacific strategy, say it was their idea, kind of thing, and a very sort of boast about their close relationship with Elbridge Colby and all this kind of thing. So there's this it's almost like a insider syndrome, or if you know what I mean. It's sort of like a sense of we're best buddies with the most powerful guy in town, and we want to keep it that sort of way. So that's what really worries me, that those sort of interests will sort of take over. But I think, to your point about the illusions about America, I think people are sustaining those illusions at the moment because they constantly talk about Trump's America and Trump's mad bad guy and all this sort of stuff. Trump's introduced the might is right world, which is a phrase that former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull has been using as well. And yes, Trump is a my views on Trump. He's he's just I don't know if he's mad, but he's certainly incompetent. And but I think it's going to take until after Trump, whenever that is, and everything keeps imploding with the next guy or girl, for people to really realise it's not just Trump that's the problem here. It's actually the sort of American system.
And that's the other thing. The might is right. Donald Trump didn't implement that. I mean, George Bush invaded the country and got 1 million people killed. The policy of the U.S. all throughout Syria, for example, of trying to overthrow the government with effectively fascist Wahhabists. I mean, look at what they're doing now. It's like, hey, are you Syrian or are you Druze? And the guy says, I'm a Syrian. And then he says, I didn't ask you that. Basically, there is no Syria. Are you Druze or not? And then murders the guy on the spot. Like the ethnic cleansing that is taking place. That was policy. Like that was U.S. policy. And it amazes me for the might is right. I'll give you one other piece. You guys, apparently, according to Trump anyway, are now importing U.S. beef. America has forced Australia to take in U.S. beef. And I'm saying this slightly jokingly, but not. Why would that happen if you aren't being bullied? Like, this is not a great relationship.
Well,
the notion
again,
that you're taking out big, beautiful cows.
Again, there's how Trump realised this story. So, as I understand it, there's pretty high standards, requirements, etc. for Australian beef.
As they should be. And Europe is the same way. The beef is better.
The beef is better. And as part of the negotiations, I think there's been some relaxation of that. So, but again, I think this also might be a case of where it might look like vassal behaviour, but it's a bit the same with Japan. But in reality, it's a in negotiations you say you offer up things that are important to the other side that are not so important to you, if you know what I mean.
The health of your citizens aren't important to you?
Well, yeah, but no one in Australia is going to buy American beef. Like,
really?
It's been all over. It's been all over the Australian social media this afternoon, saying let's boycott American beef, and you're kidding me, and it's just been totally laughed at. Australia's got some of the best agricultural produce in the world. It's got superb culinary traditions. It's a big part of the culture and all that kind of stuff. Huge beef ranges all over the country that have been part of the national tradition for a long time. It makes it cheap, it makes it high quality, all that sort of stuff. No one's going to buy toxic, expensive, dried out, awful American beef. So basically he said, yeah, Donald, yeah, look, you can sell as much beef here as you like. And of course, we won't tell you no one's actually going to buy any of it. But, so I suspect there's a bit of a negotiating ploy in that. So
Yeah.
it's partly a question of, well, Donald Trump can spin this as a big deal and a big success, but it
In
probably
reality.
isn't really the case. And it's a bit the same, I think, with the Japan deal. I mean, Warwick Powell's just done a piece on his Substack today saying that when you look behind the curtain, so to speak, of that Japan deal, all it is it's just rearranging the money that they already put in to the American market. If you've been to Japan and you know how small the cars are in Japan to fit in those tiny little car parks they have in Tokyo, etc., you know that gas guzzling SUVs from America are not really going to succeed in that market either.
No,
So
that's a good point.
I think there's some probably craft in some of these trade negotiations, and it probably reflects an attitude of a lot of the allies of let's temper the sort of raging King Lear we all have to put up with until he's gone, and just kind of keep out of the way of his rages, but without sacrificing anything too important. And then we'll go back to normal, assuming the world ever does go back to normal, a year or two from now.
Jeff, you're fantastic. I bristle at stuff like this. If you give the bully $1, he's going to take two when he comes back in a week or two.
True.
But fair enough. And I want to bring you on next week to talk about the Ukraine thing.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, because I think you and I may have a different point of view on what's happening. But we'll
Yeah,
see.
but I mean, it's good to discuss it because it's a very
Yes,
uncertain situation, isn't it? And
yes.
it's going to keep developing over the next couple of days. So it might be good
No,
just
I'm
to chat about it
fascinated
next
by
week.
alternate points of view. My
Yep.
audience, for some reason, hates it when I get in arguments with my guests. I love it. It invigorates me. I love the
Yeah.
alternate points of view. It helps me. Look, there's always this question of where's the floor?
Yeah.
And it helps me orient to where the floor is when I can have those conversations
Yeah.
with my guests. So I'm going to bring you on next week.
Just one quick thing on that from
Please.
that might be relevant to the Donald Trump discussion as well. Apparently, one of the things the protesters are chanting in Kiev is, I think it's "Я не жлоб," which means "I'm not a sucker." And
Yes.
apparently, that was something that Zelensky said. And I kind of feel
Yes.
the world is probably sort of quietly saying that,
I'm not an
sotto
idiot. I'm not a
voce to
sucker.
Donald Trump at the moment.
Yeah.
So
Your Mac should
I'm not
sit
a
on a
sucker,
dick.
Don.
Like I said. Yeah, those protests. Yeah. But yeah, I'll talk about it next week. Jeff Rich, man, the Burning Archive, again, fantastic channel. Jeff Rich is an author, historian, podcaster who worked for 33 years in government. He's now retired, but he currently lives in Melbourne, Australia. Jeff has spent a lifetime studying history and how knowledge of historical currents can help give context to a changing political world. You can find Jeff on YouTube at The Burning Archive and find him on Substack at jeffrich.substack.com. Jeff, you were fantastic. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jamal. Ciao.
Bye-bye.